Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friend, Dr. Curt Thompson.
My friend, Pepper Sweeney.
We are here to discover and explore what it means to be truly known. Hey, Curt.
Oh, my word. Hey, Pep. Man.
So if you are tuning in today and you didn't hear last week's episode, first of all, you missed a lot. Go back, listen to it now. But secondly, we were it was so much information and it was going so well. And Curt had just told this amazing story. And I knew that there were more things that we wanted to talk about in this episode. And so we decided to stop and make this a two-part episode. And so just towards the end of episode one, or part one of this two-part episode, Curt, you were sharing a story about what had actually happened last week in one of the confessional communities. And in that story, it became so apparent that it's not just what happens to us as individuals in the room, but it's what happens to everyone in the room. And it's so apparent that the Spirit of God is moving in the room. Dude. And there are things going on that are not necessarily of this world.
Right.
In those rooms.
Or they are of this world, meaning they are of the spiritual realm.
Right.
That in our kind of modernist way of thinking about the world, we've just kind of like, oh, that's spiritual. That's not the real world.
Right. Well, right.
That's not the material world.
Yes.
It's something other. And it's experiences like this where we see very clearly that like the very thing that we realized in Genesis chapter 2, that, you know, and he breathed the breath of life into man's body, and man became a living being. Like, we are spirit bodies. That we are the points of contact where the kingdom of God and the kingdom and the kingdom of the earth come together. It's not surprising that when beauty and goodness is happening in the room, and in that story, the people of the community were coming to the aid of one of their own, that the kingdom of darkness is going to want to push back and is going to want to make everybody anxious until somebody else in the room says, something's going on here. And I'm feeling it like right now in my chest. Like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what this is about, but like, I'm just feeling really heavy. I'm feeling the darkness.
Right.
That is like, oh my gosh. This is not just about what's happening for one of our members. This is happening to the community as a whole.
Right.
And this is where the body of Jesus is, in the best sense of the word, at war with the kingdom of darkness. And when we name things, when to that second member, right, when we start to connect how that person's story is connected to the other person's story, this is not unlike what Jesus is doing when he's naming demons. He's naming things in the Gospels. And they're like, no. And because when we name things, we tame things. And this is Genesis. This is the second sentence of the Bible. That God was not afraid of the chaos, of the deep. He hovered.
Yep.
And he spoke and brought order and purpose. And dude, again, that room, like in a period of about 2.5 to 3 minutes, Courtney, my colleague, just says, I just want to observe what's happened in the room. And everybody pauses and looks like, dang, something has happened here in the room. And I think this is, you know, when all this brings us, you know, we've said that we're taking things out of our imagination into a state of incarnation. We're naming what's happening in the room between me and others and as a community. And we're naming the contagion of emotion that is taking place, where the Spirit of God is wrestling with other spirits in that realm. And as we make things explicit, we are doing this work essentially of like when we talk about part of the role of formation of these confessional communities is to enable us to become bilingual, multilingual, that we are both naming the things that are happening about our stories, about our memory, what's taking place in in my family, in my marriage, my friends, and we are also naming what's happening in the room in the language of in the language of faith, in the language of Scripture, that these are principalities and powers, and we are appealing to texts in these moments when we say this is what Paul meant when Paul says that we're wrestling. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We're not wrestling against each other. We're wrestling against things that are not that easy to sense and image and feel, because most of the time they are embedded in the parts of our stories that we never talk about. But the more we talk about our stories, the more truly we say these things.
And the more you talk about your story, makes me realize about those places that I'm not talking about. And that all starts coming up, and that's what's happening. That's what's happening.
That's exactly what's happening. And it's like, you get your, your frozen or your cold piece of food or whatever out of the refrigerator, and you put it on a pot on the stove, and you slowly turn up the heat, and things start to move about.
Right.
And now you start to do things with something because you bring heat to that moment. You are naming things. You're naming something. It activates something within me. Things that I didn't know.
And then you start naming it. Yeah.
Dude. And that becomes the place where, like for instance, when people when they're naming their grief, and as they name their grief that they have historically stayed away from, but they start to name it, and then it activates something in somebody else about somebody else's grief, and before you know it, 3 or 4 people are naming their griefs, and they are not only sharing with the person who's first talked, but the collective grief of the whole space enlarges, and the spirit of the room enters. And when people sense that they are not alone in their grief, and maybe they're sensing it for the very first time in their life, they discover an awakening that there's this healing that takes place because the Spirit of God. And then what do? You say, oh, this is what it was like in John 11. What are you talking about? When Jesus first has a conversation with Martha, who comes to him and says, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And he takes her at her word, and he says, yes, but and she said, but even now you can do something. I know. And he says, I'm the resurrection. He says, I know. In the age to come, she enters into a theological dialogue with him. She's having a hard time staying with her grief. She starts to talk about the resurrection and so forth. She goes and finds her sister. Martha, I don't know. We don't know. Martha can't tolerate that story. She goes and finds her sister and says, the master is calling for you. And it's this moment when we say, look, everybody in the room, Jesus is calling for your grief. He's been calling for it. And what's happening in the room is that each of you is the body of Jesus. As a member of the body of Jesus, you are Jesus calling for the grief of somebody else. And when Mary comes with her friends, and she says the same thing that Martha does, if you'd only been here. And then she just returns to her weeping. She's not there to have a theological conversation. She's not there to debate this. She's not there to have a conversation. She is there with the only thing that she has, which is her grief. And then, dude, you see what happened. It's when Jesus, he sees her and her friends, he was moved in his spirit. And then he says, where have you lain him? And they say, come and see. And then Jesus weeps, right? John 11:35. It's when their grief is fully in the room, without theological debate, without distraction, without denial, without, I'm just going to be that's when he acts. And this is what happens in the room all the time. Jesus acts when our grief comes into the room, when we name these things, which is exactly what happened. But now we can incorporate a text. We name the text, and now like we can see that, like, oh my gosh, like what's just happened in the room? This is the Spirit of God moving. This is John 11 being made manifest in a room in Arlington, Virginia in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is just one example of the number of different ways in which we can incorporate text, in which we're becoming multilingual, in which we are beginning to master this material of becoming professional human beings. And we're practicing, and we will do this forever imperfectly. And Jesus, he's not worried about being perfect. That's not his concern. His concern is that along the way, the more liberation we sense, the less we are being imprisoned by our shame and our fear. We become people of greater wisdom. We are people who produce fruit, as Jesus says in John's gospel, fruit that will last. It's the fruit of the Spirit. All that we know about that. It is becoming people of the Sermon on the Mount. And we then become people who are more likely to look for options to create. That beauty is waiting in those moments where heretofore we've just seen them as problems that need to be solved. Not just because it's happening in the room. I now imagine taking this moment with me into my classroom as a teacher, into my work as an attorney, into my work as a contractor, in my family, in my marriage, all these things. This is the work of the Spirit transforming us in this space, that we may be agents of transformation. In that way, we learn to love the work. We become people of greater integration, and we're not spending time judging our lack of progress. It's in this way that we discover in embodied experiences what the purpose and the work of the confessional community really is. And this is the time that this takes in this middle area, this in the middle passage, this place between the beginning and the end of a confessional community. These things can happen in a period of, a few sessions. These may take several weeks, several months to happen. But over the course of time, as we continue to faithfully return to that space with the friends that are in that space, we discover that it is beauty and goodness that starts to emerge from places that heretofore we may never even been aware of that were there, but certainly often spaces that we never could have imagined that it could come from.
Wow. And is it, are you able to, as you have, been involved with several of these confessional communities, as you've led several of them now, are you able to recognize the phases as the group is going through them? Like, is it predictable at this point for you?
Well, as I tell people, for some people, like there are some people who are in the third phase in the very first session. Right. Like they're jumping in, they're not wasting any time. Now, they might not be aware that that's what they're doing.
Right.
But that's what they do. But you will see that there will be some people who move in these phases more quickly than others.
Mm-hmm.
Pep, here's the other interesting thing that we'll see is that, and this, for our listeners who are considering entering into one of these, there may be, I might bring a lot of my story into the third phase, and then I'm in a conversation and I discover, oh, there's a part of my story that I have been sitting on for as long as we have been in this group. And I am not ready to haul that thing into the room. And I'm actually quite open about a lot of things.
Sure.
And so there may be parts of us also that enter into the phases at different paces, if you will. I think what's important, again, it's not so important that, well, we got to get everybody into the third phase. What is important is that we are able to honestly just name where we actually happen to be.
Mm.
Again, without condemnation. But what's really beautiful is that in having a sense of what these phases are and being able to name them and being able to say, oh, here's where I am, we can then say, well, tell me about that. Tell me more about the part of you that you are aware of that is worried
Right.
about taking the next step. And let's, as one of the I love what my colleague Courtney Morrison, what she one of the things, one of the tactics that she uses. It's just so beautiful. And by the way, like I say, like, she's a licensed clinical social worker, LCSW. I said I think you should add two other letters at the end of your letters, and I should LCSW, comma PN. She's like, I don't know, what's PN. I said, like, I think you're a psychotherapy ninja, because that's exactly what she is. She's a PN. And but one of the questions that when people are like anxious, you can tell that, like, I don't want to know. And then she'll say, well, what if we talk about talking about it? Let's talk about what you imagine it would be like for you to talk about it. We don't have to even name the thing yet.
Yeah.
But let's name, what are you worried is going to happen? Well, I'm worried that people are going to, oh, which people? Right? And before you know it, people have begun the process of naming the thing. They've begun the process of getting fully into the pool because they have put their feet in the pool and they're now standing on the steps that go down to the pool. And they're like, I'm not sure I want to get into the pool. Step down. I'm really not sure I want to get into the pool. Step, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You taught me that. And I recently, the idea of someone that I'm close to, I knew was afraid to talk about something, and that was very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad we split this episode in two.
Dude, man, I'm telling you, like, confessional communities, dude, like,
Yeah.
it is like, I've said this to Tim Mackey. I said that our friend at the Bible Project. I said, like, when we talk about the scriptures being, what are they? They are ancient Jewish, ancient Jewish, well, God human, ancient Jewish, messianic, meditative wisdom literature that is written with the expressed purpose of being read in this cyclical, back and forth, meditative way. It's not just one linear arc. Like, and like, I think that growth for me should just be a straight arrow linear mark. I'm growing, and then I grow, and then I grow, and then I grow. Like, why do I have to go back and cover territory I thought I'd already covered like 5 years ago? Why did I thought that I had really grown with patience, grown with all the things, and then something happens and my adult child does something and I feel like I'm 10 years old? Like, why are we going back there?
Right.
And what's so beautiful is that that's actually the way the scriptures are written and intended to be eaten, in this cyclical, meditative way that continually takes us back, because Jesus, the Holy Trinity, is so serious about being so thorough, like no stone being left unturned. But there are certain things that I'm not ready to look at yet, that are still in my past. And we get a little further down the road, and what do you know? Somebody says something in the confessional community, and there I am. I'm 14 years old again. Like, I'm 60, and I'm 14 years old. I thought we'd covered that territory, and we're back at it. And like, no, but this is what it means to the text and the confessional community are mirrored images of each other. This is what the body of Jesus, we are intended to grow in the very same way that the text was written and intended to be read. Like, dude, it's just mind blowing to me.
Yeah. And the Tim Mackey that you were referring to, I don't know if you said, is with the Bible Project.
Yeah.
And that's something we talk about quite often here. We have an artistic offering today that I am really excited about because I have a relationship with this particular piece of art that you introduced me to. And it was the I would say it was probably the first time that I intentionally sat in front of a piece of art like this
Hmm.
and had an emotional experience. And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
this art piece that we're talking about today is Rothko's number 61. And Curt,
Hmm.
I'd love if you would like to talk about it a little bit. And I've got it up on my screen here right
Hmm.
now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and as we're recording, I'm looking to my left on the wall, and I see the print here. Mark Rothko, an American artist who became well known in his work with abstract pieces, but also especially these large canvases that would have two or three, sometimes four bands of color that you might see from a distance, and you're wondering like what, like it's just okay, like three bands of color, like my 6-year-old could do that. And I had an encounter. My first encounter with it was many years ago in the National Gallery, sitting with one of these pieces, and then eventually encountering in particular number 61, because you have this sense of like at first glance you're like, oh, it's just a piece of it's just color. That's all it is, which is a lot of like what we look at our life. It's just fill in the blank, or it's this like it doesn't easily make sense because I'm looking for something to make sense. But if you're willing to be with it and allow it to be with you, my experience was that after a period of time, I probably sat with it for about 30 or 40 minutes.
Mhm.
After a period of time, and it probably took 10 to 15 minutes, I became aware that it was not just three bands of color. These were layer upon layer upon layer of color. And I'm color deficient as it is, so it's not easy for me to see stuff in the first place. And then I it just starts to evoke in me things. And I'm like, what's happening here? And I remember telling you guys this, that I had this odd experience of feeling like I was being seen by the painting. And like, I'm not trying to make this sound weird, but I mean, like, this felt sense that like the painting and I are having some relationship with each other in which things I'm feeling are being evoked. Uh, and I just know that it was one of the first encounters I had with this notion that beauty. When I see a Rembrandt's Night Watch, the scene is set. It's all very clear. I know what it means. It's very like we all,
Yeah.
and so like all my defenses are up. I can like when I sit with a piece like Rothko's number 61, like I can't marshal my defenses because I don't know what it is I'm defending against.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
I had like I said, when we did this practice and I sat in front of it for about 30 minutes, I think. Um, and uh, my eyes started to well up.
Hmm, hmm, hmm,
I was very emotional, and I didn't understand it. I didn't,
hmm, hmm,
and I've since done a little bit of research, and it's not uncommon
hmm,
for people to
hmm,
sit in front of Rothko in particular,
hmm,
and cry and have an
hmm,
emotional
hmm,
response to it.
hmm,
And
hmm.
I want to ask you, Curt, have you ever been to the Rothko room? It's
Which one?
The Phillips collection.
Yes, yes,
Okay,
yes, yes.
so on October 26th, you and I are going to be together.
Dude.
We're going to be doing, and Amy's going to be with us. We're going to be doing a live
Yeah,
recording of
yeah,
the
right,
podcast.
right.
All you listeners are invited. Mark the date. We don't have a sign up for it yet, but mark the date for this, as well as the Center for Being Known conference, which will be the Friday, the following day, the 27th.
27th, right? The Connections Conference. Yep.
So the 26th, I would love to go to either this Rothko, because this room is spectacular. I mean, it's just,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Oh, what?
Let's do it on the
Dude, let's do
26th in
it.
the morning, and
Dude.
then we'll go cry in the podcast.
Oh, too
Oh,
much. Yeah.
so we do have also an application for this week, and we want you to think about how does what we have explored reveal parts of your story that you've become more curious about. And whose other stories do you long to know more about? So take some time this week and think about those two questions. And it's very simple to just get on your computer and look up Rothko number 61,
Mm-hmm.
and you can, without even going to the art museum, you can have an
Mm-hmm.
experience with it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
Curt,
Yeah.
bud,
Man,
I love you.
dude,
Thank
love
you
you.
for thank you for today, and I can't wait
Mm-hmm.
for next week.
Yeah.
And
Right on.
those of you who are watching on YouTube, stick around because Amy's coming on.
Hey guys,
Hey, Kate. Good to see you.
good to see you.
Can you see
Okay,
her?
so
Okay.
I sort
Well,
of
I can.
see.
Let me just say,
I just looks
you
like a
know,
floating head. I can't
it
see.
does.
Oh, camouflage. I
Oh,
did.
that's
yes,
right.
I
There you
know.
go.
Wow,
Oh,
I tried
Yeah.
really hard.
yeah,
I just need to get a camouflage
Well,
hat.
you were pretty effective
Anything.
yeah.
because I just, yeah, I think those artificial backgrounds you can have, Pep. I just thought, right, I
Yes.
just thought like, oh my gosh, it's so good. It's just her face and her glasses and
Right.
her hair. I can
Yeah.
see. I couldn't see anything else.
Can you
Go
hear
ahead.
that generator?
No.
Oh
No,
my gosh, thank goodness. Okay, so talk
I
about
mean, I
being
mean, I mean, even the sound is camouflaged,
Yes.
so talk about naming what's in the room. So, you guys are talking and they're doing construction outside of my building.
as they always
And
are.
as they always are, the trash
Apparently,
trucks have already come, but I'm sure another one will come. But I can hear someone trying to start a generator.
huh?
And I can hear the person like pulling the thing, pulling the thing. I'm like, you're going to flood it, pulling the thing. And I'm praying. I hope it doesn't start. They were just successful in getting it
Okay.
started.
Oh, well, yeah, I
Perfect
don't hear
timing.
it.
But
Yeah.
that's fabulous.
Okay.
Whew. It's so good.
Mm.
So good. Okay. So a couple of things that stood out to me were okay, and we talked about this last week, or the part one.
Yeah.
That we come into the phases.
Yeah.
And I think you said as much. Like we can go even if we're in phase 3, we can go back to phase 1
Very
in
like
like 2 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah. But the idea that we come into the room thinking that there are problems to be solved. And then we get to the point where we are loving the work and can't imagine like not doing the work. Like there's not an end to this.
Right.
This is life.
Right.
And then the fact that we are all works of art.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're doing in these rooms, and not even in these rooms, because we're doing it in relationship with there are official confessional communities, but then even with our friends, it's a confessional community.
Yeah. Well, we
And
have
so
one right here. We have one
right. Yeah.
in this the
Yeah.
three of us.
Yeah.
We do. There is a way to do this. Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we're chipping away and finding the art that
Yeah.
is there.
Yeah.
I was struck by a couple of things that you said talked
Mhm.
about in the first episode for part
Uh-huh.
one,
Yeah.
where one thing where you're talking about the person that comes in and is automatically thinking, how am I going to get out? Kind of like,
When's this end? How long do I have to do
I remember
this?
when we were at a church out in California and they started a new community groups, right? They started new community groups and they were calling them life groups. And I didn't want to join because I'm like, I am not signing up for life. I mean, it's just not. And that's where my head was. But yeah. Can we
That's
name them
funny.
something
That's
else?
funny. Like we can call them month groups.
Yeah, right. But the other thing that you talked about just a little bit was this idea of presence when people don't realize their presence. I used to have, I will say, because I'm the youngest in my family, and we were pretty fortunate. Been pretty fortunate, and there weren't. I didn't go to a lot of funerals in my life because, you know, but now I'm spending a lot more time in funerals. The last few years, a lot of people have passed. People that are close people, and I used to have the occasion when I did have funerals when I was younger, I had a lot of anxiety because, you know, the way that that receiving line,
Oh, uh-huh.
and I'd get in that line and I think, what am I going to say? in the first, like I know these people on this end of the line. I don't even know some of the people in the front of the line in the family, and
Mhm.
and I would get anxious and be like, why
Mhm.
would I, like, what can I even say that will be any comfort or anything that's not been said 600 times before I get up there?
Yep.
But I do realize now that just being present,
Yeah.
just being
Mm-hmm.
present
Mm-hmm.
is part of the healing process.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
It's part of
Mhm.
the
Mm-hmm.
process. And,
Yeah.
and, um, and
Well, and we might say it isn't just part of the process. It is the fundamental.
yeah,
It is the fundamental element that
Mm-hmm.
right,
courses throughout the entire process. It's
right.
the hard
Mm-hmm.
deck on which
Yep.
everything else for healing in life is built.
And knowing that now has made that, like, um, that experience, even for me as the person that's offering it, has made it, I don't have any anxiety coming in anymore. I'm just like, I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
This is why I'm
Mm-hmm.
here.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you're present. So you're
and I'm present.
doing, yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what's really beautiful, Pep, is that when you come into that space and you are uh, present and you are like aware that you are present and that that's mostly what
Mm-hmm.
you're there to be,
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
the one who receives your presence, they know it, they sense
Mm-hmm.
it,
In
they
their core. Mm-hmm.
right, they say, like, because when somebody else comes and they're anxious because they're trying to find something to say or to do or to whatever, like they also know that they're like, look, I don't
Yep.
I don't need you.
Yep.
Yep. And so it's such a beautiful thing because and like what you're doing, like you are being the second sentence of the Bible,
Mhm.
hovering,
Mhm.
attuned, completely at ease within yourself, present
Mm.
with the chaos, and simply at the ready to speak in order to bring order and purpose.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
But it all begins with your hovering, attuned, attentive presence.
Yeah.
Okay. I have two other things. Um, One, okay, the idea that when that we can start where we are, like if we're afraid, and then if we say, well, I'm afraid people are going to be mad at me, and then it's like, well, okay, who in this room? And so being in a confessional community, if that comes up, sometimes we'll say, well, like everybody, I'm afraid everyone's going to be annoyed. And then the facilitator will say, everyone equally, because it's very rare that it's everyone equally. And it's on not only on the fear side, like if you say I'm feeling very supported and I feel the care, and it's like,
Right.
who? And there's
Yeah.
so much power and vulnerability in saying
Right. Right.
the person.
Right. Right. Well, this gets like we gets the other side of so you're pointing out something else too. One of the other questions that we will frequently ask is, um, from whom do you want something right now?
Oh, mm,
From whom do you want something? And the amount of courage that it takes for someone to say, "Oh, I just witnessed this past week too." There was the particular person who turned to, I've mentioned her, Courtney, turned to
uh-huh.
her in particular
PM.
and said, yeah, that's right, PN, I'd love to hear from you because when
It's
you talk,
crazy how vulnerable
when
that is. Like how
right,
hard that
to
is
ask
to
for this,
say.
or but
Yes.
let alone, and it's even one thing to ask something from Courtney or from me, who are kind of like
Yeah.
the parents in the room.
Yeah.
It takes even more to look across the room, and especially if it's a dude, if it's a guy who's asking for something from a woman.
Uh-huh.
That's when it's like, all the, having to do with all the things that we don't like.
All
Is
the
this
things.
is this okay? Because of we've talked about this, that sex is in the room, like it's in the room, like the whole
Yeah.
notion, like when men and women are in the room, this sense of attraction and longing and connection and so forth that we are still waiting to have happen from the first from our first parents, Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
Like to say, yes, I would love, because when she speaks, when he speaks to me, I really feel protected,
Mm-hmm.
John, when you talk to me, I feel like I hear something I wanted to hear from my dad that I never heard.
So
And of course, at first glance, John might feel like, oh my gosh, now I got to deliver. I got to deliver. Like, no. Like you've already been doing it.
Right.
Sarah,
that's why she's feeling it.
Right. And Sarah's just now making it explicit. And so
Yeah.
so John's like, oh my gosh, like
That's so cool.
I'm actually doing something for someone by being whatever. Like, and these are like, that's something that like we don't experience in individual therapy. Because like, I never hear that I'm like doing something for my therapist.
Yeah.
But part of my healing depends upon my being aware that I'm actually a conduit of healing. Which is part of, this is what the body of Jesus is doing. It's not just that we can bring healing to others, but that when I am vulnerable, that I become a conduit of healing, in and of itself becomes healing for me. Spirit of God, man.
Yeah. Okay, I want to tell one story. I know I'm mindful
no,
of
that's
your
good.
time. Okay, so this is like in the moment. So the three of us, we do this work together. We are a mini confessional community. So before when I interrupted you guys, I interrupted the recording.
Yeah.
So before I got there, I had to think, okay, at what point do I interrupt? I want to interrupt at a time where we can split. I have to think through the schedule, the podcast schedule. And then I have to think, is this just the stupidest idea ever?
Interrupting, the notion of interrupting. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Or the idea
Pepper and I were talking about that later.
Yes,
later
about what a lame idea this is.
About whether or not it was the stupidest idea ever. And we decided no, it wasn't. It might be close, but it wasn't the stupidest.
But the beautiful thing is that I thought, okay, even if I were to interrupt you guys and it'd be like, no, we're just going to keep racing through this and do it in one episode. It was like, I thought I can tolerate whatever. And it's like, then that is where, when we have those experiences, then it just builds on. Am I making sense?
No, totally.
And it's like, oh my gosh, it's in the room. Yeah. And there would have been a time that I would have never interrupted. I would have been like, we'll just figure it out.
Yeah. I think you're just trying to put off doing the artistic offering.
I know. I'm like, that worked. I don't have to do that for another week. It's a side benefit.
Yeah.
No, I think I'm so grateful that you said that, because it is an example of kind of, it tells a story about our corporate relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It is a story. I mean, you're telling your experience, but it is a story that is about our community.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm.
And that's just beautiful. And I would love for our listeners to hear this, because, and this is the thing, we before we enter into these, communities, like, we don't have these experiences. And so we don't have the practice. So we don't have the confidence yet to believe that what you just said can happen. We don't have, you're going to have to work into it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's going to feel risky. Yep, it is. Right? Because the gate is narrow. The path is narrow. Right? It's hard. It's hard to do.
It's risky business. It is hard to do. But it is the right kind of hard. It is the life-giving hard. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, folks.
Yeah. Man, so good to be with you guys.
Really great.
For sure.
Really great.
All righty.
All right.
Until next time.
Until next time.
This podcast is produced by Curt Thompson, Pepper Sweeney, and myself, Amy Chella. Audio production and editing is by Keaton Simons. Video production and editing is done by Mark Gould. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on social media at BeingKnownPod. If you like this podcast, tell a friend. If you love this podcast, tell everyone you know. And please like, rate, and review wherever you listen. Be well, be now.